What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. These battle lines being drawn, nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, hitting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, what's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. A week ago, after months of public shaming by Bernie Sanders, and after several years of organizing by the Fight for 15 movement, Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon and the richest man in the world, worth about $165 billion, announced that he was raising the minimum wage of 250,000 permanent Amazon workers and 100,000 seasonal workers to $15 an hour. But was shaming by Bernie the real reason? And will it make a difference for the workers at Whole Foods markets, which Amazon bought a year ago? With me tonight to discuss this and Whole Foods workers' efforts to start a union are Matthew Hunt, former Whole Foods worker from New York who was fired for organizing, and Tyler Jay, a current Whole Foods tech employee in the Rocky Mountains area, who is one of the organizers of Whole Workers. We are not showing his face due to fears of retaliation. Welcome to the Robust Opposition, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, my first question goes to you, Matthew. When did you start working for Whole Foods, and what were the conditions you observed there that caused you to want to start organizing a union?
So I started there back in May of 2014, and I had known people that had worked there before I even started, and some of them were run out of the store based off their sexual identity, and the fact that that was happening in a company that likes to pride itself on being, I guess, somewhat progressive and a little bit better than the average employer, that was definitely a big motivating factor in why I did what I did. I knew team members that were crying after being on the phone with management or coordinators. As soon as I walked in there, I saw that there were no cashiers. The place was completely understaffed. There were lines going into the aisles. You could smell the cesspool overflowing into the store. And this is still happening, I might add. I knew the first day that I was going to start organizing. And there was a lot of assumptions that I was like a SALT, a paid undercover organizer when I was there by store leadership. But that's not the case. I was a grassroots organizer, and I did it because, it was the right thing to do, and I just saw that the conditions were horrible. I started at, I believe, 11 or 11:50, and I left there at 12:50, and I had a bachelor's degree.
Which one of you would like to address some of the things that I read about how local and specialty products were being cut? There were consolidations in jobs, specifically cuts in marketing and signage positions. There was a program instituted called Orders to Shelf, OTS, which people say we're turning workers into robots. Who would like to address that?
I could talk about that.
Okay.
I guess that's a couple different things. Let's see. I think for me, I started seeing things kind of going downhill 2015. That's when the first big round of layoffs was, late 2015. That's when Whole Foods started aggressively consolidating positions. They laid off several like store buyers, supervisors, associate team leaders at each store in the company. The marketers was later. That was earlier this year. I think what happened between, and this really goes back before Amazon, but what happened starting in 2015 was just an aggressive consolidation of positions. So I think one of the problems Whole Foods has today is just like low morale, particularly among team leaders, associate team leaders, and that's because like many of them that stayed, are now doing 2 and 3 times the work they were before. The teams are much larger. They have fewer resources. Many of the ones that stayed were like promoted up, so they're making less than team leaders used to make. So compensation's less. And then even, for instance, stores in my metro, buyers, the actual like need to buy and replenish shelves, like that didn't really change. So they laid off all these buyers, who were making like, a certain wage. And they tried to just kind of consolidate into like 1 or 2 kind of super buyers, they called them at the time. And that didn't work. So now like the structure is pretty much the same as it was in 2015, only all of these kind of lower associate buyers are all making, $3 and $4 less than, people were back in 2015. The marketers, the local stuff you talked about, Lauren. So Whole Foods before Amazon started moving towards a more centralized buying structure. Whole Foods used to really just be, regions, and the regions were fairly autonomous. And each region had regional buyers and regional coordinators. And a lot of them are still there, but all of the purchasing and kind of planogram decisions are now handled centrally. And so what's happened, especially like in the last years, like you've just seen, fewer local products, planograms and sets in stores being set globally. Really poor communication with a lot of these local vendors. Like Whole Foods will come in and kind of like reset, aisles of the store. And then just a lot of the local, vendors that we used to really embrace are pretty much just like cut out of the loop because, their point of contacts previously would be people in stores or regional buyers, and their jobs are more being kind of centralized. So they don't even have a lot of authority anymore in many circumstances in terms of like what products we can carry. The store marketers, that was really this year, and that's kind of what got me going. Apologies too if you have. I feel like this is kind of there's a lot that's happened, I think, since 2015 through today, but earlier this year is when all of the store graphic artists were let go. On top of that, metro marketers, really all these people that used to drive these local programs. So like Whole Foods used to talk about your local Whole Foods, embracing like local vendors, local growers. And that's not gone away completely, but it's much more difficult now. And what happened was every store in Whole Foods used to have a store graphic artist, and these are people that do these amazing chalks and local displays, and there'd be local events and things. There'd be a lot of outreach that like store marketers or metro marketers would do. And that really changed this year when all those folks got laid off.
You and I talked earlier about the conditions in the organic food industry that sort of led to this. When Whole Foods sort of had a monopoly on this organics business, and now we have Walmart getting into it, and my local Ralph's and my local Safeway, lots of places you can get organic foods. That, and also the pressure of being a publicly traded company where you constantly have to report short-term profits, and that's what the CEO compensation is based on. All of this sort of led to the sale well, some of these things that you're talking about to decrease costs, as well as to the sale of Amazon, to the sale to Amazon. And John Mackey, who is the CEO of the company then and also the CEO of the company now, seems to have positioned the sale to Amazon in very favorable terms. But I want to talk a little bit about John Mackey before we get to the organizing. He wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism. He's a known sort of right-wing libertarian. And he wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism and started a movement in it. And I'm just going to read to you a paragraph for your reaction. Conscious capitalism is a way of thinking about capitalism and business that better reflects where we are in the human journey, the state of our world today, and the innate potential of business to make a positive impact of the world. Conscious businesses are galvanized by higher purposes that serve, align, and integrate the interests of all their major stakeholders. The higher state of consciousness makes visible to them the interdependencies that exist across all stakeholders, allowing them to discover and harvest synergies from situations that otherwise seem replete with trade-offs. They have conscious leaders who are driven by service to the company's purpose, all the people the business touches, and the planet we all share together. Conscious businesses have trusting, authentic, innovative, and caring cultures that make working there a source of both personal growth and professional fulfillment. They endeavor to create financial, intellectual, social, cultural, emotional, spiritual, physical, and ecological wealth for all the stakeholders. Now, to me, that sounds like a bunch of BS designed to rationalize a very bad economic system that we're all suffering under. But I'm more interested in hearing your responses. Do you want to go first, Matt?
It honestly just sounds like some new age garbage mixed with neoliberal bullshit. I mean, it's just kind of a joke. I mean, if this economic model works, then why are all the employees suffering? Why are they doing this? Why is the economy just not working for 99% of us? So, I mean, it's a joke. It is. Now, whether or not Mackey actually believes this stuff, I don't know.
Now, Tyler, you sent a letter in July. I'd like you to talk about the letter that started this whole workers organizing campaign. And in that letter, you referred to the principles of team member growth and excellence, which is part of his whole credo there. But you basically said that you felt that he was preferencing customers over team members. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I think all that stuff he wrote, first when I started with Whole Foods was about 10 years ago. And I came to Whole Foods after losing my job in the recession, 2008. It very much felt like that back then, and a lot of that resonated with me. And I feel like it was a much different company. I think like he could say a lot of those things he wrote in Conscious Capitalism simply because things were easier back then. They were flush with cash and their business was, growing rapidly and they're opening new stores. And there's, a lot to love about Whole Foods, even us today, like we love Whole Foods. I love, there's a lot I don't like about Whole Foods and we have, serious issues with certain things. But that whole Conscious Capitalism, that felt more authentic 8 or 9 years ago. What happened was other companies started moving into the natural and organic, food sector. Particularly, I think when Walmart and Costco moved in there really aggressively. I want to say starting back in like 2013, 14. And then by the time we got to 2015, like Whole Foods just couldn't compete anymore. That felt more authentic back then. In terms of the letter we wrote, I think what's happened over the past several years is, Whole Foods had these kind of grandiose core values, And, and I think most of us like love our core values, and we believe it's important to uphold them. And people have been working with Whole Foods for a really long time, like me, like love the idea of working for a value-driven company. But what's happened is as their business models became less viable and they couldn't compete particularly on price, and they started having, quarter after quarter of, sales growth decline and things like that. It was really like the team members that got squeezed. And you really see that starting with those layoffs in 2015. As far as our letter, one thing I noticed, particularly since the Amazon buyout, is anytime John Mackey gives an interview or anytime he's doing a broadcast to team members, he loves to say that customers are our most important stakeholder. And I think I heard him say that, over and over, and I really personally just kind of got sick of it and just, almost kind of disgusted. So like one of our kind of central kind of messages we let off with is that, clearly customers are important. We all love our customers. And one of the, hardest things today is like, labor's been cut so just aggressively that like we can't talk to customers very much anymore. It's very difficult. But the thing we let off with in our letter was that, clearly customers are important, but customers are not the most important stakeholder. As a stakeholder, we believe it's smarter and more conscious to, look at things in terms of, your stakeholders are your customer, your vendor, your team members. Those are all stakeholders. We believe that team members and employees are stakeholders of equal importance to customers. I think Mackey started saying that customers are our most important stakeholder after the Amazon thing happened. My personal opinion is he was pandering to Bezos, because that's kind of Amazon's core philosophy is customer obsession. So I kind of think that was pandering. I used to not hear that customers were our most important stakeholder. We used to talk more about, win-win partnerships with vendors, team member excellence and happiness, great customer service. And I think just as the business got really challenging and our budgets just tightened, just things really changed. Does that make sense?
First of all, how did you have the emails of the workers in 490 stores?
That took a lot of work. And I hear just the rhetoric inside, Whole Foods. They don't believe we're current Whole Foods team members, most of us. And just in the meeting, like I was in this morning when they announced some of these, the more details on the wage increases, they like to make fun of the media. They believe the media just makes stuff up. That took a lot of work. I basically discovered that a lot of Whole Foods internal distributions, just their Outlook aliases, were open and would receive mail from outside domains. And our other partner, Lisa, we had been, after the store graphic artists were laid off, that was really kind of what got us going. That was really just a kind of a gut-wrenching time, and just we thought just a disgusting business decision. We were trying to reach out and coordinate with store graphic artists, and that was challenging simply because they were so terrified, and their severances was tied to them staying on the job, and then it was being paid out week by week. So they were really not wanting to like do things really aggressive. So we were trying to find another way to get our message out. And we found is that a lot of the internal email distributions were open. And so we just started gathering them, and it took a lot of work. And we gathered store buyer aliases and store scanner aliases, and some other aliases. We had a list of, when we were all done, close to 600 or 700. And then we just set up Gmail accounts, and there's some of the Gmail accounts we still use today. And we wrote a message, a letter. We targeted it to store buyers and store supervisors, associate team leaders. We targeted it kind of this mid demographic on kind of the people who we felt had been kind of squeezed the most, and who we thought were, probably had the most issues with Whole Foods. And we crafted that message, and we hit send. And we were fortunate. We had started talking to a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. They helped us fact check some things in our message, particularly with regard to profit sharing had gone away and being given exclusively to store leaders. So that was kind of what we led off with. And we surprised most people within Whole Foods, we think, because basically when Amazon bought Whole Foods last year, everyone's Whole Foods stock was cashed out. Everyone had assumed that profit sharing would come back in some form. And what we found out was that no, the plan was it wasn't going to come back, but store team leaders, which are store managers, and executives, regional people, coordinators, a lot of them had all gotten on Amazon stock grants. So effectively, there were thousands of people working for Whole Foods who had taken a pay cut and didn't even know it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the message we let off with, where our buyers were like, hey, you guys didn't realize this, but profit sharing's gone. It's not coming back. Not only that, is your store team leader has gotten Amazon stock and they probably haven't told you. We had a huge problem with that. And I still just, one of Whole Foods' core values is supporting team member excellence and happiness, setting people up for success. And we just thought that was a really disgusting, kind of soulless thing. And now they're backpedaling. They're backpedaling aggressively and trying to kind of get control of the narrative again. But that's basically how we sent our message. We targeted those aliases. We targeted team members we knew who were affected by this, and that was pretty successful.
Okay. So what were you asking for? Were you asking him to join a union? Were you asking Mackey to make changes?
We were asking people to stand up to Mackey. We believe there are numerous reasons why regular Whole Foods employees should not trust global leadership or Amazon. We weren't asking people to join a union right then. What we were doing is asking people to join an online community that we had named Whole Worker. And so we had instructions in this letter, this invitation that went out on how to anonymously join an online community where we could all come together and talk. One of our core principles of like the online group is not everyone in there is necessarily supportive of unionization or even like would want to. That was really like, we thought unionization may never happen, but we can all come together and collectively do some stuff and put intense pressure on Whole Foods and Amazon, which is exactly what we did. It's been fascinating because Whole Foods treated it like a union campaign, and they started sending these training videos and started holding these closed door meetings and started doing some aggressive stuff that we've been documenting. And we've just been kind of sitting back and learning. As far as unionization and organization goes, that's happening now. That's starting now. But just forming the Whole Worker community, that was just bringing people together. People are terrified to speak out and stand up, and we wanted to give them a way they could do that would not come back and blow up in their face in their job. So no member of our community's account, any one person's account, cannot be traced back to their store or where they work. And today we have several hundred members, and now we're kind of working on the next steps.
Yeah, I want to get to the next steps towards the end of the show, but first I want to go back to what happened to Matt when he actually did try to organize a union at his store in New York, and what happened to you?
So I was there until January of 2017, so that was a few months before Amazon came in and bought Whole Foods. I was fired on January 22nd, which was the same day my fiance was also fired. And we were both organizing there, and we both wore UFCW pins, which is the union that we organized with. We wore those for months, so Whole Foods has no possibility of making a claim that they didn't know we were organizing. It was pretty obvious. I sent in a job application for a shifty position with my leadership experience saying that I was organizing several committees at different Whole Foods. So they have no way to claim that.
Tell me about the recordings that you made and how you were first doing them surreptitiously, and then you actually announced that you were doing those recordings.
Yeah, so in Whole Foods' gig book, which is their policy book, they had a section that said that It's against Whole Foods policy that you can't record conversations because they believe it would have some kind of chilling effect, because they want to have open discussions with team members. That was basically not very true. I believe it was a way to stifle team members from having the power to hold management accountable. And the National Labor Relations Board saw that the same way that I did, basically, when they ruled, I believe in December of 2015, that their policy was not lawful. Whole Foods was then told to change the gig book. It took them a very long time to do it, and I believe they're still even working on it. But yes, when I would be dragged into meetings with management that were clearly always about unionization, I would record them. It was my only defense. I mean, without a union rep, without having other team members there to support me and back up my claim, it was what I was reduced to. So I did it. And store leadership eventually went around telling people that you can't record. And during one meeting I had with management, I pulled out my recorder as I was recording it and told them, I'm recording this meeting and you need to stop telling people to record, to not record. And that basically ended the meeting. So it shows that having that recorder, having something to back up what you're saying, it gives you power. It does.
There was a tape leaked to Gizmodo about how Amazon counsels its workers or its managers to be on the lookout and try to stop efforts for union organizing. Who wants to talk about what was in that video?
You can watch clips of it, or most of it, I think, on the Yahoo Finance article and on Gizmodo. Mainly, I just thought it was really manipulative. It was basically an instructional video, telling team leaders, how to subtly manipulate their team members, how to watch out for warning signs. That's my basic impression of it. We just thought it was very manipulative and creepy. I think one of Whole Foods' biggest problems is that they can't speak to any of kind of our core concerns, particularly with the wage increase. They've not really been able to address, labor shortages, morale. I think they're trying to, but we just thought it was a really, thought it was bizarre. I'd not seen training videos at Whole Foods before that were just flagrantly kind of just manipulative and creepy. I don't know. What do you think, Matt? That's my opinion.
Frankly, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, because when large companies contract out to a union busting firm or a union busting law firm, they'll frequently employ industrial psychologists. So whether or not one was actually brought in to advise on the creation of this video, we don't know. But it does fit the model of just creepy union busting.
Looked like it was specifically an Amazon training video, but it came down and team leaders were told to watch it. It came down, I think, a week and a half after we went live, and then we were sent recordings of it by members of our group.
Matthew, can you talk about the company that you wrote about in Medium, that company that they called in actually to bust unions?
Yeah, so it was back in, I believe it was May of 2016. There was a union election filed at a Whole Foods distribution center down in Miami, and they hired a union busting firm called Culture Consulting, which was started by, his name is Peter List, and he used to work for a labor union, I believe, CWA, and then later turned to the dark side. And I don't know much about what actually went on, but there were documents that, so there are documents that union busting firms and companies are required to file with the Department of Labor. But since we have such weak labor laws in this country, there's usually ways to get around that. they must have, it must have been pretty intense if they actually had to go and file this, because we know Whole Foods has been union busting for decades. The fact that there was actually documents sent to the Department of Labor about it shows something. And this company was paid $109,000 for less than a month's work. And this gentleman, Peter List, was even involved back in, I believe it was 2013, around then, with this group called Groundswell, which was almost a proto-Trumpian movement that's not very well known. And it included people like Steve Bannon, Frank Gaffney Jr., John Bolton, a lot of very, very far-right figures who would later go on to be in the Trump administration, or at least whispering into his ear. And this company even at one time worked for Donald Trump and helped bust unions at his casinos in Atlantic City. And they even did it at Trump's Marina, which closed down in around 2011, which later turned into the Golden Nugget, which Culture Consulting was literally hired just this year in May and is currently busting a union there.
Tyler, there was an announcement made today that you posted on your Twitter account by John Mackey. Can you tell us what the announcement said and what your response to it is?
There were some more specific details about the wage increases. Basically, quickly, it was, and people can read the full letter there on my Twitter account, which is at Fake John Mackey. It described just some of the details on how the wage increases will work. If you're below 15, you get bumped up to 15. If you've been there for a certain amount of service, like if you've been at Whole Foods for a long time and you're right around 14 or 15, they'll bump you up a little higher. And then people above that, I think, will be bumped up $1. And that was the gist of it. There's talk about they're bringing back a training program, which that's this. A lot of us just thought that was just kind of funny and interesting. They also talked about profit sharing. That was something that people were confused about because about 5 days after we launched, there was an email from John Mackey that basically addressed some of kind of the things we were talking about. It said, yes, store team leaders have gotten Amazon stock grants. We heard you. We are bringing back profit sharing in the form of restricted stock units in the first half of 2019. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the letter, and I believe that letter is on my Twitter account as well. This is the letter that came out about a month ago after we launched. And then Amazon announced a $15 minimum wage, which, and it's interesting like that. That's huge. Like we're really happy about that. We're happy like our little part we were able to play in kind of helping bring that about, helping put pressure on Amazon and Whole Foods. And that's going to have tremendous positive impacts for workers everywhere. I think it's like amazing. The reaction within Whole Foods was different. I'd say more skeptical, mixed. I just don't think there's a lot of trust within Whole Foods, within most stores, towards like leadership anymore. So like most people thought like, well, if they're increasing like wages, are they going to cut labor more? Are they going to address any of the other problems? Are they even going to admit that there are problems? And we didn't know, but in the Amazon blog post, they said specifically that profit sharing wouldn't come back. So there's a discrepancy where the CEO of Whole Foods, John Mackey, had said that, yeah, profit sharing is coming back. We've heard you. And then the Amazon blog post said that, no, we've sampled our team, our employees, and they would prefer, a larger profit, a larger paycheck, in lieu of profit sharing. So there wouldn't be restricted stock units. And what we heard today was that restricted stock units would come back, but it's just a one-time grant. So our initial response to that is, that's frustrating. That's very problematic. We believe very strongly that if you are a worker and you work, for a wage, for a living, if you're cut out of profit sharing, we believe basically that that's exploitation. If you're cut out of profit sharing, that makes it very hard to retire. You are always compensated less than the value you add to your organization. So if I show up for work on October 1, in between October 1 and say October 30th, I've put in X amount of work. I've added X amount of value to my company. I'll always be compensated less than the value I add. And that's modern capitalism. That's at-will employment. We have a huge problem if there's no ongoing profit sharing. So that's one of the things we're looking at. And that was kind of our initial reaction. Like, a lot of new team members are going to get a big increase in pay, which is great. It's going to have a new baseline. It's going to have a ton of positive impact for workers everywhere. And that's amazing. Most people in Whole Foods will see moderate pay increase, and that's still really cool. But the fact remains that most people in Whole Foods and Amazon are locked out of the value gains they add to their organization. They're locked out of profit sharing. So the fact that it's a one-time grant, I think, is a big problem.
All right. Well, let me just talk about profit sharing as a concept, because here we are talking about why capitalism is bad and there's no such thing as conscious capitalism. But profit sharing depends on capitalism, because if you're profiting from the whole pie, the profits depend, as we've said throughout this whole show, on cutting costs. And cutting costs means usually cutting labor, because labor could be one of the biggest components of the costs. So to want a share of the profits puts you on that almost, what is the word? Tautology, missing what the word is, but it's just a contradiction in terms. What do people want profits for? What do people want money for? They want money to get the necessities of life and some extras, right? So the point that many of us who are fighting capitalism say is that if people had the necessities of life paid for, if we had free health care, if we had free college, if we had free broadband, if we had affordable housing, et cetera, then we wouldn't necessarily need ridiculous wages and really, and big profits, right? So this is just a little rant of mine. You don't have to agree with me on this, but I just think profit sharing as a concept is problematic unless, of course, it's a worker-owned co-op. And that way, everybody's sort of benefiting equally, and they know that by firing each other, they are going to be. You following me with this? I mean, Matthew, do you have any thing you want to add about that? Because you and I were talking about this earlier on the phone.
Well, at the very least, capitalism is clearly a failed system. It doesn't work. I think we've known that for a long time. In terms of the profit sharing, at least at Whole Foods, it's definitely been extremely problematic, because it has been found out that store team leaders were essentially stealing from it. And there's been, I believe, multiple lawsuits, right?
Oh, wow. Here's a comment here from a worker. Maybe you want to address.
You need 6,000 service hours. I've been with the company 3.5 years with 45,000 hours.
Maybe he means 4,500.
45. Oh, it must be 4,500.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, no, he won't. That's one of the finer details too. You have to be above 6,000 service hours to qualify for profit sharing. I think like what you're saying. No, that's I don't disagree with any of that. I think that's true. It'd be amazing if it was. What we think, like we look at a lot of, at least I do, a lot of European business models. It's common in countries in the EU for workers to have a seat at the board of directors. In our country, the board of directors really respond exclusively to investors, shareholders. That's it, and it's just a purely profit-driven thing. I think our contention with the profit sharing is really just being able to retire someday. I think people want to be able to work and show up, and most people that work for Whole Foods, like, they still, like, we love Whole Foods. You love what Whole Foods is about. I'm a huge foodie and love to cook, and there's all sorts of stuff about Whole Foods that I love. But the people, like, we're working with, we have a big problem if one class of workers, if most workers are cut out of profit sharing, whatever form that takes. And then store team leaders, management, executives still get ongoing profit sharing. I think that's a big problem.
Well, we've reached the end of our show, so I really would just like you guys to sum up with whatever final words you would like to say, and also specifically address how people can get involved if they're a a Whole Foods worker, if they can get involved. This Whole Worker WFM is how they can find you on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Would you also want to give out that email address I could put up there?
Sure. Our main group's email address is wholeworkerwfm@gmail.com. They can find us at wholeworkerwfm on Twitter, Instagram, facebook.com/wholeworkerwfm. If any, and apology if I've rambled or anything. I'm not used to doing things like this. But we really appreciate being able to be on here. We're planning kind of our next moves, and we have a lot of stuff we're working on, but really, like, we want to reach more team members. If there's something I can say to any Whole Foods team member who is listening or who sees this, please reach out. If any of this resonates with you, please reach out. Most people are scared. They're terrified of getting involved, that it could blow back and they could lose their job. What we've done so far, we've done at zero cost. I had to pay for a VPN, and that's about it. We're doing it with smartphones and Chromebooks. We're using free services like Signal and Telegram. We can show you how to protect your identity. We can show you how to protect your IP address, how to do things in private, how to coordinate with other team members in such a way that's not going to, like, blow back on you. And that's the concern I run into a lot. So if this resonates with you, please reach out to us. We can it's honestly not that hard. It's really not that hard with today's tools to protect your identity online. And obviously, like, love to be able to be more upfront about this. Apologies for everyone who's staring at my shirt. That's weird. But please reach out. We feel that, like, our cause is, the cause of Amazon workers. We're talking to many of them, other retail workers. We have things we're planning in terms of ground campaigns and the actual unionization stuff, which I can't really talk about. But yeah, just, please reach out. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Gmail, and if you want to get involved, we can show you how. And
I think the main reason I decided to come forward with my identity was there's some skepticism, obviously, among team members that this is like some kind of trap by Amazon, or it's not a serious organizing attempt. It is. That's why I decided to show my face. That's why I decided to show my identity. Also, Whole Foods, if they had any brains in them, which I assume they do, they probably figured out I've been involved for some time. In terms of what people should do, definitely contact us, please. Our number one priority is keeping you safe, keeping your identity safe. If there's any retaliation, we have plans for that. So please, Your safety is number one. Please get involved. This is not just a problem about Whole Foods too. This is a problem about Amazon and how they treat their workers. We shouldn't have homeless workers living in Amazon warehouses.
Yeah.
And it's not just that. It goes beyond that. It goes to Walmart. It goes to the entire system of work that we live in.
Yeah.
I'm 31. I don't want to work myself into the grave. And at this point, I'm one of millions that are like that. And if we don't do something as a society, We're going to be working to the grave. We literally are. One thing maybe we can do in the legislative avenue, talk to your representatives. Talk to them about, it's called co-determination. That's what Ty was speaking to, which would give us a seat at the board at companies. They're on their way in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn to implementing that. It might not happen, it might happen. It's never talked about here. As far as I know, I don't believe Bernie Sanders has ever spoken to it. But I recently met Tim Canova back in the summer, and that was one of the things he supported.
Yeah.
So please bring that up to your elected officials. Talk about it. It's something that could happen, and it would give us power. It wouldn't fix everything, but it would give us some power.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being on the show, and thank you for your courage in coming forward. That's what it takes in order for these kinds of changes to happen. It always starts with a few courageous people that take a stand, and then a social movement will follow, and then, of course, the politicians will come last. So thank you for being on my show. I'm going to say goodbye to you now. Please share this show so that more people could see it. And until my next show, keep fighting.